of you. And joining us now is Republican Congressman from Virginia, Bob Good, a member of the Freedom Caucus and the House Education Committee. So, Congressman, you introduced and passed the House resolution to overturn the student loan forgiveness program. The average federal student loan debt in your state is just shy of $40,000. That's a lot of money. And Virginia has 1.1 million borrowers. So what's your message today to the 45 million student loan borrowers nationwide?
I'm thankful for a Supreme Court that's returning to the foundations of the Constitution as the primary rule of law, the law of the land. And this is a Constitution. This is a Supreme Court that respects the Constitution. With respect to student loan debt, first of all, we shouldn't be calling it a forgiveness plan. It's not a forgiveness plan. It's a student loan transfer scheme. Joe Biden said about a year ago he didn't have the constitutional authority to forgive student loan debt on his own. Nancy Pelosi said that. His Secretary of Education, Cardona, said that. And yet he does it anyway, just like the eviction moratorium. He takes action that he knows he doesn't have the constitutional authority to do, hoping that the Supreme Court will not overturn him. Thankfully, the Supreme Court is abiding by the Constitution and has done this. You know, 60% of the members of the constituents, I should say, in my 5th district don't have a college degree. To try to force them to pay the student loan debt for the wealthiest of Americans, people making up to $250,000 for a family or $125,000 as an individual, have their student loan debt forgiven or paid for, I should say, taken on by borrowers who do not incur that debt is wrong. It's immoral. The president doesn't have the authority to authorize or appropriate funds like this. He doesn't have the authority to make law on his own. If he should work through Congress if he wanted to try to do this. Of course, he can't work through Congress. Our Congressional Review Act that overturned this before his veto was a bipartisan bill that was passed through the House and the Senate with Democrats supporting it. It's just wrong for the American people, and I'm glad the Supreme Court has risen to the occasion here.
And just one point is that this is not helping the wealthiest people, because the wealthy people pay, they don't take out student loans. This is helping working class, some poor people, middle class people who have not qualified for all kinds of other programs and are able to go to college because they're taking out these loans and carrying this burden for the rest of their careers, some of them.
Well, I'm in the Education Workforce Committee. This is our responsibility, policy like this, and the student loan debt is absolutely held disproportionately by higher level income Americans. Again, the student loan transfer scheme that Biden has proposed would go for families up to $250,000 in income. That's well above the average income in my district. Individuals making $125,000, well above the average in my district. You know, I've got hardworking families in my district who would just as soon not have to pay their mortgage if they didn't have to. They just as soon not have to pay for their car loan. They just as soon not have to pay for their credit card bill. But they understand they took out that debt, they borrowed that debt, it's their responsibility. And the same is true of those who invest in themselves and go to school, invest in their education so they can earn a higher standard of living. I have members of my family who have student loan debt. I had student loan debt, but we recognize it's immoral and unjust to have others have to pay that student loan debt, and that certainly it shouldn't be transferred to those who didn't borrow it.
It was interesting that one of the people interviewed by Shaq Brewster today in Chicago was wearing a MAGA hat. He was not a Biden supporter at all, didn't vote for him, but liked this program because he thought it was fighting for the working class. Do you have any concerns about the political impact? We already saw how the Dobbs decision last year impacted the midterms. Do you have any concern about the politics of all this?
We need to do what is right. And for the president to announce this on the verge of the last election in October, just before the election, I think it was a vote-buying scheme. He knew it wasn't constitutional. He knew he didn't have the authority to do it, but he also knew it probably wouldn't get blocked until well after the election, and it didn't. So it probably did impact the 22 elections for some individuals who were voting on the basis for this, where he was lying to the American people and suggesting that he had authority to do this. But we ought to do what is right. And the bottom line, we are at $32 trillion in debt. We're going to run nearly a $2 trillion deficit again this year. We shouldn't be borrowing from our kids and our grandkids to pay the student loan debt for individuals, the higher income Americans, and we shouldn't be forcing taxpayers who didn't borrow that debt, who maybe worked their way through school so they wouldn't have student loan debt, or they worked hard to pay off their student loan debt, or they chose not to go to college, and we're trying to transfer that loan debt to those individuals. The Supreme Court declared appropriately that is unconstitutional, and thankfully they overturned this effort.
Well, it's very good, and I appreciate your coming on to have your views. But another time, let's have a debate as to who contributed to the deficit and to the business breaks. And
I look forward to doing that. I look forward to doing that. We've never in the history of the country had so much debt rung up in the first 2 years of administration as we had here.
I look forward to that conversation. Please come back. We appreciate it.
Thank you. Great to be with you, Andrew.